envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, the kind of crisp white paper that carries nothing but bad news. I stood in the narrow kitchen of my parents' old seaside house, still in my cleaning uniform from the night shift at the hospital, and felt the world tilt beneath my feet. Eviction notice. Foreclosure proceedings. 7 days to vacate or settle outstanding debts, totaling an amount I couldn't earn in 3 years. My hands trembled as I read the numbers again, hoping I'd miscounted the zeros. The salt-stained windows behind me framed the gray ocean my mother used to paint, back when we had time for things like art and dreams. Now the house itself was crumbling, peeling wallpaper, a roof that leaked when it rained, floorboards that creaked with every guilty step. But it was ours. It was all I had left of them. "Elena, please don't." My sister's voice crackled through my phone an hour later, desperate and distant. She'd moved to the city years ago, started fresh, left the ghosts behind. There has to be another way. Like and subscribe if you love listening stories. There isn't. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, watching seagulls circle the rocks below. I've borrowed from everyone who'll listen. I'm working doubles, triples. The bank doesn't care about sentiment. But Mama wanted us to keep it. She made us promise. Promises are luxuries for people who can afford them. I'd learned that the hard way, watching my father work himself to death trying to pay medical bills that kept multiplying like some cruel math I'd never understand. And when he was gone too, the debt didn't die with him. It just transferred to me, patient and inevitable as the tide. The realtor's office smelled like artificial lemon and desperation. "Mrs. Chen had kind eyes but a practiced sympathy that made my stomach turn. "You're making the right choice," she said, sliding papers across her desk. "The market's tough right now, but we have interest already. A private buyer, actually. Cash offer, very generous." Something in her tone made me pause, pen hovering over the first signature line. "Private buyer? Who?" "They've requested discretion. But the offer is well above market value for a property in its current condition." She smiled, and I hated how that smile said more than her words. "Your house is falling apart, and you're lucky anyone wants it," I signed. What choice did I have? That's when the cold seeped in, not from the air conditioning, but from somewhere deeper. Through the office window, I caught sight of a black car idling across the street. Tinted windows, chrome details that caught the afternoon light like a blade. Someone was watching. I could feel their eyes even through the glass, assessing, calculating. "Mrs. Chen's phone rang before I could ask. She answered, listened, and her expression shifted into something I couldn't quite read. Professional unease, maybe. "Yes, of course. I'll let her know." She hung up and folded her hands, that practiced smile returning. "The buyer would like to meet you. In person. Tonight, if possible." "That's not standard procedure, is it?" "Nothing about this sale is standard, Miss Rossi. But I'd recommend accepting. They're offering an additional $10,000 for a personal meeting." Money I desperately needed. Money that felt like a hook sinking into my flesh. I looked at the paperwork, at my father's name still listed on the deed beneath mine, and felt something in my chest crack open. Where? The cafe she named was on the edge of downtown, the kind of place where tourists don't venture and locals know better than to ask questions. I arrived 15 minutes early, wearing the only dress I owned that wasn't a uniform, feeling exposed and ridiculous. The sunset bled red across the harbor, painting everything in shades of warning. He walked in exactly on time. I knew it was him before anyone said a word. The air simply changed, became heavier, more deliberate. He moved like someone accustomed to space clearing around him, not aggressive, just inevitable. Tall, dressed in black that probably cost more than my yearly rent, with dark hair precisely cut and eyes the color of winter seas. Pale gray, almost silver in the dim cafe light, and cold enough to make my breath catch. "Miss Rossi." His voice was low, controlled, with an accent I couldn't quite place. European money, old and unapologetic. "Thank you for coming." He didn't offer his hand at first, just stood there, studying me with an intensity that felt like being read in a language I didn't speak. When he finally extended his hand, I took it. His grip was firm, warm despite his cold appearance, and something about the contact felt less like a greeting and more like a verdict being handed down. Adrian Voss. He said his name the way some people say checkmate. We sat. He ordered for both of us without asking what I wanted. Espresso for him, tea for me, which happened to be exactly what I would have chosen. That small presumption should have irritated me, but instead it unsettled me in a different way. How did he know? You're wondering why I want to meet. He didn't phrase it as a question. His fingers wrapped around the tiny espresso cup with surprising delicacy, and I noticed his hands elegant, scarred across the knuckles in ways that suggested old violence, carefully healed. Your property has sentimental value to me. Sentimental? I tried to keep my voice steady, professional, as if I sold my childhood home to mysterious strangers every day. The house is in terrible condition. No one's wanted it for months. I'm not no one. The corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile. And sentiment isn't always about condition, is it? Sometimes it's about position. History. Potential. The way he said potential made my skin prickle. I wrapped my hands around the teacup, needing something to hold. I don't understand what you want from me, Mr. Voss. The sale is straightforward. I sign, you pay, I leave. Almost. He leaned back, and the cafe lighting caught a detail I'd missed before, a thin scar running from his left temple down to his jaw, barely visible, the kind that spoke of something sharp coming very close to ending a life. I have one condition. I'd like you to stay on temporarily, just until the transition is complete. Stay on? It's my family's house. I know every inch of it. Exactly. His eyes held mine, and I couldn't look away. Which is why I'm offering you a position. Temporary work, cleaning and maintenance at my primary residence, while we handle the property transfer. Good pay. Accommodation included if needed. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, that normal buyers don't hunt down sellers and offer them jobs. But the number he quoted was enough to cover 3 months of my sister's student loans, enough to buy me time to figure out what came next. Enough to make me seriously consider accepting a deal from a man whose eyes revealed absolutely nothing. You clean for the hospital, don't you? He said suddenly, conversationally, as if he hadn't just dropped a bomb into the middle of our negotiation. The cardiac wing. Double shifts, Tuesdays and Thursdays. My blood went cold. How do you know that? I make it my business to know who I'm dealing with, Miss Rossi. He set down his cup with a soft click that sounded too much like a cell door closing. You're in debt. Your father's medical expenses, your sister's education, your mother's final year in hospice care. You work yourself to exhaustion, but the numbers never quite add up, do they? They're designed not to. Anger flared hot in my chest, burning away the fear. You investigated me? I protect my investments. Something flickered across his face then, gone too quickly to identify. Almost like regret. But I'm not your enemy, Elena. May I call you Elena? He already knew everything about me. What difference did my name make? I didn't answer, just stared at him, trying to understand what game we were playing and what rules I'd already broken by showing up. Think about it, he said, pulling a business card from his jacket with that same careful precision. Matte black, silver lettering. Voss Holdings, a phone number, nothing else. You have until tomorrow to decide. The house sale goes through regardless. But this offer, he slid the card across the table toward me. This is separate. A courtesy. I don't need courtesy. I need, my voice cracked, and I hated myself for it. I just need to survive this. For the first time, his expression shifted into something almost human. Almost kind. I know. That's why I'm offering. He stood, leaving cash on the table far too much for 2 drinks, and buttoned his coat with movements that suggested ritual, habit, control. As he passed my chair, he paused, and I caught his scent. Expensive cologne underlaid with something darker, leather and smoke and winter rain. Everything of value deserves protection, Elena, he said quietly, close enough that I felt the words against my ear. Remember that. Then he was gone, the cafe door closing behind him with a whisper of hinges. Through the window, I watched him climb into the black car I'd seen earlier. The engine purred to life, and in the brief moment before the car pulled away, I saw something glint in the fading light: his watch, gunmetal gray, engraved with words I couldn't read from this distance. I sat there long after my tea went cold, turning his card over and over in my hands, feeling the weight of a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. The next morning, I called the number. A woman answered, professional and brisk. Voss Holdings, how may I direct your call? I'm calling about a position. Adrian Voss offered me, Miss Rossi. Yes, Mr. Voss is expecting you. A car will collect you tomorrow at 9 a.m. Please pack for a week's stay. Do you have any dietary restrictions we should be aware of? The efficiency of it stole my breath. He'd known I would call. Known I had no other option. No restrictions. Excellent. The driver will have your contract and an advance on your first week's payment. Have a pleasant day, Miss Rossi. She hung up before I could ask any of the 100 questions swarming my mind. The car that arrived the next morning was the same black vehicle from the cafe, now in full daylight, revealing itself as something sleek and German and worth more than my house even before it started falling apart. The driver, a silent man with military posture and eyes that tracked everything, opened the door without a word. Inside, cream leather and the faint scent of Adrian's cologne, as if he'd just stepped out. The contract was in a folder on the seat. I read it as we drove, watching my neighborhood give way to progressively wealthier streets, the ocean growing distant and then returning, larger somehow, more commanding. The terms were generous to the point of absurdity. I'd be cleaning and maintaining his primary residence, the Voss estate, apparently with accommodation and meals included, for double what I made at the hospital. 1 week trial period. Either party could terminate with 24 hours notice. It seemed too simple. Too clean. The estate appeared after we turned down a private road lined with old trees that seemed to lean in, conspiring. Gates opened silently at our approach, wrought iron, ornate, topped with security cameras so discreet I almost missed them. The house beyond made my breath catch. Mansion didn't quite cover it. The building sprawled across manicured grounds like something out of a period film, all stone and glass and architectural confidence. Modern wings connected to older structures, the whole thing suggesting generations of wealth building on itself, never quite erasing what came before. The ocean crashed against rocks somewhere behind it, close enough to hear, far enough to feel protected from. This was where I'd be living, working. This was who Adrian Voss actually was. The driver opened my door, and I stepped out onto gravel that crunched like broken teeth. Another woman waited at the entrance, older, stern, dressed in black with hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. Miss Rossi. I'm Mrs. Kovac, head of household. Mr. Voss is in meetings, but I'll show you to your quarters and explain your duties. My quarters turned out to be a small suite on the 3rd floor, bedroom, bathroom, sitting area that was nicer than anywhere I'd ever lived. Clean lines, soft grays, a window overlooking the gardens that probably looked spectacular in daylight but right now just reflected my own uncertain face back at me. You'll start tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., Mrs. Kovac said, handing me a folder identical to the one in the car. Your sections are marked. East wing, 2nd floor. Library, conservatory. Do not enter Mr. Voss's private quarters or his study without explicit permission. Do not discuss your employment with anyone outside this household. Do not ask questions. I finished for her, exhaustion making me brave. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Approval, maybe, or warning. Mr. Voss values discretion above all else, Miss Rossi. Those who remember that do well here. Those who don't. She let the sentence hang, weighted with implication. After she left, I sat on the edge of the bed, soft enough to sink into, expensive enough to feel like a trap, and tried to understand what I'd agreed to. Through the walls, I could hear the house settling. It sounds unfamiliar and vaguely threatening. Pipes humming with secrets. Floorboards creaking with the weight of things I couldn't see. I thought about calling my sister, then remembered the contract's confidentiality clause. I thought about running, then remembered I had nowhere to run to. So instead, I unpacked my Single bag of belongings. Hung my two spare uniforms in a closet designed for a wardrobe, 20 times that size, and tried to sleep in a bed that felt like it had been waiting for me specifically. The work started before dawn. Mrs. Kovac provided a key card that opened some doors and not others, a map of my limitations rendered in electronic locks. The sections I'd been assigned were already immaculate, maintained to a standard I'd never encountered in my hospital rounds. I wasn't cleaning so much as preserving perfection, erasing the microscopic evidence that humans occupied these spaces at all. The East Wing smelled like old books and furniture polish, its windows overlooking gardens where someone had sculpted the hedges into geometric patterns that suggested control over nature itself. I moved through rooms filled with art I knew I shouldn't touch, books in languages I couldn't read, furniture that probably cost more than my education, and everywhere, security. Cameras in corners, sensors on windows, the red blink of alarm panels, reminding me that every move was monitored, recorded, filed away in some database of my choices. I felt watched even when alone, which I quickly realized was the point. Surveillance as architecture. Control made ambient. On the third day, I found the locked door. It wasn't on my map of approved areas, just a dark wood panel at the end of a corridor, unmarked, with a keypad instead of a traditional lock. Something about it drew me, maybe because it was the only imperfection in the estate's carefully curated openness. Maybe because I'd grown tired of following rules designed by someone who seemed to know me better than I knew myself. I tested the handle. Locked, of course. But as I stood there, hand on the cold metal, something clicked inside. The mechanism released with a whisper, and the door drifted open an inch, revealing darkness beyond and the faint smell of paper, leather, gun oil. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew I should walk away. Every instinct screamed this was a test, that someone was watching to see what I'd do with access I hadn't earned. But the gap between knowing better and doing better is where all terrible decisions live, and I was so tired of being kept in the dark about my own life. I pushed the door wider and stepped inside. The room was a study, masculine, austere, dominated by a massive desk and walls lined with files. Dim light from a shuttered window illuminated dust motes that swirled like disturbed spirits. I moved closer, curiosity overriding caution, and that's when I saw my name. Rossi, family debt paid. The folder was thick, official, marked with dates and numbers that made my vision swim. I opened it with shaking hands and found my father's signature, my mother's medical records, line items for treatments and medications, and the impossible mathematics of dying in America. And there, in brutal red ink, debt, assumed by Voss Holdings. The floor seemed to drop away beneath me. Adrian hadn't just bought my house. He'd bought my family's debt. He'd known about us, known we were drowning, and he'd what? Helped, claimed us? I couldn't tell the difference anymore. You weren't supposed to see that. His voice came from behind me, quiet and resigned, and I spun around so fast I nearly dropped the folder. Adrian stood in the doorway, still in a dark suit, his expression unreadable in the shadows. He didn't look angry. That somehow made it worse. How long have you been there? My voice came out accusatory, sharp with betrayal. Long enough to watch you choose curiosity over caution. He stepped into the study, and the door clicked shut behind him with a finality that made my pulse spike. I wondered if you would. This debt, my father's name. What is this? I held up the folder like evidence, like it proved something other than my own ignorance. Adrian moved to the window, adjusting the shutters to let in more light, giving himself time to construct whatever careful answer he'd prepared for this moment. Your father borrowed money to cover your mother's cancer treatments. When he couldn't pay, he borrowed more. The people he borrowed from weren't banks, Elena. They were my people. The words hung between us, heavy with implication. His people, not a vague syndicate or abstract criminal element. His. So, what, you own us now? Anger burned through my shock, hot and clarifying. You bought our debt like we're collateral? I paid your debt. He turned to face me, and his eyes were cold again, that human flicker I'd seen at the cafe gone completely. There's a difference. The collectors who held your father's notes were going to come for you. For your sister, I intercepted them. I made the problem go away. Why? The question came out broken, confused. Why would you do that? For a long moment, he just looked at me, and I saw something move behind his careful mask, something like pain, like memory, like the ghost of whoever he might have been before he became this. Because everything of value deserves protection, he said finally, echoing his words from the cafe. And because your family's debt put you in danger from people far worse than me. What makes you any different? But even as I said it, I knew the answer. He was here, telling me the truth or a version of it when he could have just let me keep cleaning his floors in ignorance. Nothing makes me different. He crossed the room until only the desk separated us, until I could see the exhaustion around his eyes, the weight of whatever empire he'd built pressing down on shoulders that held it all without complaint. I'm exactly what you think I am, Elena. But I'm also the only thing standing between you and people who would have taken everything from you in ways that make death look merciful. I wanted to throw the folder at him, to rage against the casual arrogance of him deciding my fate without my knowledge. But underneath the anger, a terrible understanding was taking root. He'd saved us, in his own cold, calculated way. He'd erased the debt that would have destroyed whatever remained of my family. And now I was here, in his house, under his protection, and I didn't know if that made me safe or trapped. What do you want from me? I asked quietly, setting the folder down before my hands could betray how badly they were shaking. Nothing you're not willing to give. He reached across the desk, not quite touching the folder, not quite touching me. Keep working. Keep your sister safe. Let me do what I'm good at, which is keeping problems from your door. And if I want to leave, then you leave. I told you the contract terminates with 24 hours notice. But out there, he gestured vaguely toward the window, toward the world beyond his controlled environment. You're just Elena Rossi, marked by association with debt your father couldn't pay. In here, you're under my name. My protection. No one touches what's mine. The possessiveness in that final word should have terrified me. Instead, it sent a different kind of shiver down my spine, something I absolutely could not afford to feel. I stepped back, putting distance between us that felt psychological more than physical. I need to think. Of course. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. The door opened for you, Elena. I wanted you to find those files. I'm tired of you looking at me like I'm a stranger when I know exactly how many hours you sleep, what your sister studies, which memories keep you awake at night. If we're going to coexist, you need to understand what this is. And what is this? His smile was sad, knowing, edged with something that looked like inevitability. Protection with a price. Everything in my world has one. But I promise you, this whatever I cost you will be less than what you would have lost without me. Then he was gone, leaving me alone in Start Me. His study with files full of my family's destruction and salvation, wondering when exactly I'd stop being a person and become a problem to be solved. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered the mansion's corridors like a ghost, avoiding the cameras where I could, not caring where I couldn't. The house revealed itself differently at night, less pristine showpiece, more living creature with its own rhythms and rules. I heard voices behind closed doors, the murmur of business that didn't stop just because the sun set. Saw men in expensive suits moving through halls with the careful coordination of soldiers. This wasn't just a home. It was headquarters for something I'd barely begun to understand. I found myself in the kitchen eventually, drawn by the universal comfort of familiar spaces. Someone had left a light on above the stove, casting warm shadows that softened the commercial-grade appliances. I was searching for tea when I heard the crash glass shattering somewhere deeper in the kitchen, followed by a quiet curse. Adrian stood by the far counter, a broken glass at his feet, blood welling from his palm where he'd apparently caught a shard. He'd taken off his suit jacket, rolled his shirt sleeves up, and looked more human than I'd seen him, tired, caught off guard, almost vulnerable. "You're bleeding," I said, more to announce my presence than to state the obvious. He looked up, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, at being caught in a moment of imperfection. "It's nothing." It's not nothing if you're dripping blood on your floor. I grabbed a kitchen towel and moved closer without thinking, old instincts from years of cleaning injuries taking over. Let me see. He hesitated, then held out his hand like a child, offering evidence of mischief. The cut wasn't deep, but glass had a way of being vicious. I wrapped the towel around his palm, applying pressure, acutely aware of his proximity, the heat of him, the way he watched me, with those winter eyes softened by pain into something approaching trust. You should have this looked at properly, I said, not looking up from my makeshift bandaging. You're looking at it. I'm not a doctor. No. But you're here. His other hand came up slowly, carefully, and brushed a strand of hair back from my face with a tenderness that felt like violence to every wall I'd tried to build. That makes you better than a doctor right now. The air between us thickened into something dangerous. I was suddenly aware of every point where we almost touched his injured hand in mine, his fingers near my cheek, the space between us measured in heartbeats and terrible decisions. This man had bought my family's debt, had investigated me, had pulled me into his world with the calculated precision of a chess move. And yet, standing in his kitchen at midnight, binding his wounds with a dish towel, he felt like the most honest thing I'd encountered in years. Why did you let me find those files? I asked quietly, still holding his hand, still not meeting his eyes. Because you deserve to know what you're standing in the middle of. And because, he stopped, some admission dying before it could reach air. Because what? Because I'm selfish. His voice dropped lower, intimate despite the space, despite everything. And I wanted you to choose to stay, knowing. Not in ignorance. I finally looked up at him. That's not a choice. That's coercion dressed up as honesty. Yes. He didn't flinch from the accusation. It is. But it's still more than anyone else would offer you. His phone buzzed then, shattering the moment with the insistence of a world that didn't care about midnight confessions. He checked it with his free hand, and I watched his expression shift from something almost soft back into the mask of Adrian Voss, untouchable and lethal. His jaw tightened, eyes going cold as whatever message he'd received rewrote his priorities in real time. I have to go, he said, extracting his hand from mine with what seemed like genuine reluctance. At midnight? My schedule doesn't follow daylight. He moved toward the kitchen door, pulling his jacket back on with practiced efficiency, becoming armor again. But at the threshold, he paused. Elena, in this house, loyalty decides who breathes. Remember that. The phrase landed like prophecy, heavy with warning I didn't fully understand. What does that mean? It means keep your head down. Don't ask questions you don't want answered. And don't. He stopped himself, some instinct warring with policy. Just be careful. Then he was gone, leaving me in the kitchen with broken glass at my feet and the ghost of his touch still burning against my cheek. I cleaned up the glass in silence, wondering what kind of business required his attention at midnight. What kind of world ran on schedules divorced from normal human rhythms? As I swept the last shards into the trash, I noticed something I'd missed before there, on the windowsill, a small bird with a broken wing that Adrian had apparently been trying to help when I'd walked in. It looked at me with black eyes that held no judgment, just the patient suffering of something that knew it couldn't fly but hadn't learned to stop trying. I understood that feeling completely. The next morning, I woke to sirens. Not close, but not far enough. Police or ambulance, that particular wail that meant someone's nightmare had just begun. I dressed quickly and went to my assigned sections, trying to lose myself in the familiar rhythm of work. But the household staff whispered in corners, and Mrs. Kovich moved through the mansion with an urgency that suggested whatever had happened at midnight had consequences bleeding into daylight. Stay in your sections today, she told me curtly when our paths crossed. Mr. Voss has meetings. He's not to be disturbed. I nodded, but the warning only sharpened my attention. As I cleaned the library, polishing wood that already gleamed, straightening books no one seemed to read, I became aware of voices from the room below. Adrian's study, directly beneath the library's south wall, and the floors here were old enough that sound carried through gaps I hadn't noticed before. Can't keep doing this. A man's voice, deep and frustrated. The Marinos want blood, and you're offering them property. They'll see it as weakness. They'll see it as strategy. Adrian, calm as ever, but with an edge underneath. We give them the North Docks, they give us peace. For now. And when they want more? When they push into our territory? You're too soft with them, Voss. A pause, weighted and dangerous. Call me soft again, Marcus. See what happens. The other man, Marcus, made a sound that might have been bitter laughter. You've changed. Since you brought that girl here. You're distracted. I'm focused on keeping us all alive. If that reads as distraction, you're not paying attention. The men talk. They say you're going soft. That you bought our house for reasons that have nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with enough. Adrian's voice cut through whatever accusation was coming. My reasons are my own. The decision stands. Now get out. Footsteps. A door slamming. Then silence, broken only by the creak of a chair and the sound of something heavy, maybe a glass, maybe a fist hitting wood. I stood frozen with my dusting cloth, heart hammering, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. He'd bought my house for reasons beyond strategy. The men thought he was going soft, and there were people called Marinos who wanted blood, whatever that meant in a world where midnight phone calls pulled men from kitchens and sirens sang warnings just before dawn. I was in something deeper than debt, deeper than employment, and I had no idea how to swim my way out. The days that followed developed a routine that felt like careful choreography, Adrian and I orbiting each other through the mansion's spaces, never quite colliding, always aware of where the other stood. He worked in his study or disappeared for hours to meetings I wasn't supposed to know about. I cleaned and maintained and pretended not to notice the increased security, the men in suits who watched me with assessing eyes, the way Mrs. Kovac started locking doors that had previously been open. But at night, we kept finding each other, not intentionally, or maybe completely intentionally, with plausible deniability built into every encounter. He'd be on the terrace smoking cigarettes he claimed he'd quit, and I'd wander out for air. I'd be in the library looking for something to read, and he'd appear to retrieve a file. We'd talk carefully at first, then with increasing honesty, like two people lowering weapons 1 degree at a time. I learned he'd inherited his empire young, too young, when his father's decisions caught up with him violently. That he'd spent his 20s consolidating power and his 30s trying to legitimize what couldn't be fully cleaned. That he rarely slept, didn't trust easily, and carried the weight of keeping hundreds of people employed in industries both legal and otherwise. You make it sound noble, I said one night, sitting on opposite ends of a leather sofa in the library while rain hammered the windows. Running a criminal organization. It's not noble. It's necessary. He swirled amber liquid in a crystal glass, studying it like it held answers. You think the world is divided into good people and bad people. It's not. It's divided into people who have power and people who suffer from those who do. I chose which side I'd be on a long time ago. And which side am I on? He looked at me, then really looked, with an intensity that made breathing difficult. You're on the side I'm trying to protect. Whether you want to be or not. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. The thing growing between us had no name, no clear beginning, just a slow accumulation of midnight conversations and moments when our guards dropped low enough to glimpse the humans underneath. I told him about my parents, my mother's paintings, my father's terrible jokes, the way medical debt had eaten our family alive 1 bill at a time. He told me about the bird on his kitchen windowsill, how he'd found it after a storm and couldn't bring himself to let it die, even though saving it served no strategic purpose. Everything doesn't have to serve a purpose, I said. In my world, it does. That's how you survive. That's how you stop living. He smiled then, rare and genuine, and for a moment he looked younger than his years, younger than his scars, just a man who'd forgotten what it meant to exist without calculating cost. Maybe. But I'm still here. That counts for something. It counted for more than I wanted to admit. But the world outside our carefully maintained bubble was closing in. I started noticing cars parked too long on the estate's perimeter. Caught glimpses of men I didn't recognize watching from the tree line. The security detail doubled, then tripled, moving through the grounds with the tight efficiency of people preparing for war. Mrs. Kovac stopped giving me sections in the outer wings, confined me to interior rooms away from windows, and when I asked why, her expression went grim. There are people who would hurt Mr. Voss by hurting those close to him, she said carefully. You need to stay where we can see you. I'm not close to him, I'm his employee. Her look said she didn't believe that any more than I did. The breaking point came on a Thursday. I was in the conservatory, watering plants that someone else usually tended, when I heard shouting from the front of the house. Not angry shouting, terrified. Desperate. I dropped the watering can and ran, every instinct screaming to stay hidden, warring with the need to know what was happening. The entrance hall had become a war zone. Men in suits, Adrian's men, formed a defensive line near the doors, weapons drawn but not yet fired. Beyond them, through the shattered remains of what had been ornate glass panels, I could see more men, different men, with harder faces and eyes that promised violence. And there, in the center of it all, Adrian stood with his arms slightly raised, positioning himself between the intruders and the rest of his household. You're on my property, Marino. His voice carried that same cold, calm, but his body was coiled tight, ready for the violence he was trying to prevent. That's a mistake you don't get to make twice. The man facing him, older, scarred, with the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile decades ago, laughed without humor. Your property. Your city. Your territory. You talk like you're still in charge, Voss. But word on the street says you're getting soft. That you're more interested in playing house with some little cleaning girl than protecting what's yours. Ice flooded my veins. They were talking about me. Leave her out of this, Adrian said, and the shift in his tone made even his own men tense. This is between us. Nothing's between just us anymore. You made it personal when you bought her daddy's debt. When you brought her into your house, like she's yours to protect. So now she's part of the equation. Marino gestured, and one of his men produced a photograph of me, leaving the mansion for my sister's birthday last week, caught in profile, unaware. Pretty thing. Be a shame if she disappeared. If her sister had an accident. If everyone you tried to save ended up. The gunshot cracked through the air before he could finish. Adrian had moved so fast I barely saw it, weapon drawn from somewhere, fired with the precision of someone who'd done this too many times to count. The shot went wide deliberately, a warning that shattered glass behind Marino's head. The message was clear, the next one wouldn't miss. Get off my property, Adrian said quietly, but his voice carried the promise of graves. And if you or any of yours come near her, if you so much as think her name too loudly, I will burn your operation to the ground and salt the earth where it stood. That's not a negotiation. That's a fact. For a long moment, no one moved. The air crystallized around potential violence, everyone calculating odds and consequences. Then Marino smiled, cold and knowing, and lowered his hands. You're already losing, Voss. You just don't know it yet. We'll be seeing you. And her. They withdrew like smoke, leaving behind shattered glass and the smell of cordite. Adrian's men closed ranks, checking perimeters, securing the breach. And Adrian stood there, with the gun still in his hand, staring at the empty doorway like he could will his enemies back just to finish what they'd started. Then he turned and saw me. Whatever emotion had been playing across his face vanished instantly, locked behind the mask he wore for everyone except those midnight moments when he forgot to pretend. He holstered his weapon in a movement so practiced it looked like dance, and crossed to where I stood frozen in the conservatory doorway. Are you hurt? His hands moved over me professionally, checking for injuries I didn't have, and the tenderness of it was somehow worse than the violence had been. No. I'm fine. What was that? A reminder. He stepped back, putting distance between us that felt like policy rather than preference. That I have enemies and you're standing too close to me to avoid being one of their targets. The casualness of it gutted me. So, what, I'm just collateral now? Something for them to threaten? You're someone I refuse to let be used against me. His eyes held mine, and I saw the calculation happening behind them, some decision being made that I wasn't part of. Which means things are going to change. Starting now. What? things? Your freedom. Your movement. Every choice you make from here forward. He said it without apology, without room for argument. You're confined to the house until this is resolved. No leaving the grounds, no contact with your sister without supervision, no, no. The word came out sharper than I intended, but I was done being moved around like a chess piece. You don't get to decide that. I'm not yours to lock up. That's where you're wrong. He leaned in, and his voice dropped to something intimate and terrible. The moment I paid your father's debt, you became mine in every way that matters to people like Marino. You can hate that. You can fight it. But it won't change the reality that right now, the only thing keeping you alive is my willingness to go to war over you. The enormity of it pressed down like atmosphere. Crushing. I never asked for this. No one asks for this, but here we are. He straightened, and the mask was fully back in place. Adrian Voss, the untouchable, the unyielding. Mrs. Kovac will move you to a suite in the interior wing. Stay there unless I send for you. And if I refuse? His smile was sad, knowing, edged with inevitability. Then, I'll have you moved anyway. I'm done giving you choices when the wrong one gets you killed, Elena. He walked away before I could respond, barking orders to his men, transforming from the person who'd shared midnight confessions into the leader who'd just threatened to raise an empire for someone he claimed as his. And I stood there in the conservatory, surrounded by plants that grew only because someone had decided they deserved protection, and finally understood the full weight of what it meant to be something Adrian Voss valued. I was safe, I was trapped, and I couldn't tell the difference anymore. The interior suite was beautiful in the way prisons are when designed by people with unlimited budgets and no sense of irony. Thick carpets to muffle footsteps, windows that looked out on the garden but didn't open. A door that locked from the outside with a soft click that sounded like goodbye. I spent 3 days there, brought meals by silent staff, visited only by Mrs. Kovac, with her careful updates that revealed nothing. The mansion hummed with activity. I couldn't see men coming and going, vehicles arriving at odd hours, the sense of something building toward a conclusion I wasn't privy to. On the 4th day, the maid who brought my breakfast was different, younger, with nervous hands and eyes that darted to the door like she expected to be caught. "You're new," I said, just to say something, to hear a voice besides my own. "Started last week." She set down the tray, then hesitated. "Miss Rossi, I'm not supposed to, but you've been kind to me when I messed up, so I'm telling you he's not your enemy." "What?" "Mr. Voss. Everyone's saying you're his prisoner, but that's not what's happening. He's negotiating, trading everything he's built to keep you safe. The men don't understand it, but I do. Sometimes keeping someone safe looks like locking them up, and it's only love when the person doing it would rather hurt themselves than see you harmed." She slipped something into my hand, a keycard, small and warm, from her pocket. "This opens the side exit near the library. No cameras for exactly 90 seconds at 3 a.m., maintenance window. If you're going to leave, that's when." "But miss..." Her eyes met mine, earnest and worried. "Maybe don't. Maybe trust that he knows what he's doing." Then she was gone, leaving me with breakfast I couldn't eat and a choice I didn't want to make. I spent the day turning that keycard over and over, feeling its weight like it carried more than just electronic access. Freedom. Agency. The chance to reclaim a life that had been decided for me by men who saw people as assets to protect or threats to eliminate. But leaving meant stepping out of Adrian's protective shadow, meant becoming a target for people who wanted to hurt him through me. Men admitting that whatever we'd been building in midnight conversations and kitchen first aid was just an illusion, that I'd confused captivity for care. At 2:45 a.m., I made my decision. The mansion was different at night, not sleeping, but holding its breath, waiting for dawn or disaster. I moved through corridors I'd cleaned 100 times, each step feeling like betrayal or reclamation depending on how I tilted my head. The side exit materialized from shadow exactly where the maid had described, and the keycard worked with a soft beep that sounded like permission. Then I was outside. The air hit me cold and salt-sharp, full of ocean spray and freedom. I ran not toward anything, just away, letting my feet carry me down the winding drive toward the gates that seemed impossibly far. Rain started falling, light at first then heavier, soaking through my clothes and plastering hair to my face. I didn't care. For the first time in weeks, I was making my own choice, even if it was the wrong one. I made it maybe 50 yards before I realized I wasn't alone. The figure materialized from the trees, tall, dark, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd been tracking me the whole time. Not Adrian's men. Someone else. Someone who grabbed my arm with bruising force and slammed me against the rough bark of an oak that had probably stood there long before any of us were born. "Stupid girl," the man growled, breath hot with alcohol and malice. "You made this too easy." I tried to scream, but his hand covered my mouth and panic flooded through me with the realization that I'd just done exactly what Adrian had been trying to prevent. I'd walked right into whatever trap his enemies had set, and my own pride had been the bait. Then came the umbrella. It appeared over my attacker's shoulder, almost comically out of place, held by a man in an expensive coat who looked profoundly annoyed at having to be out in the rain. Adrian's underboss Marcus. I remembered from the conversation I'd overheard regarding the scene with the weary patience of someone collecting a wayward child. "Let her go," Marcus said conversationally. "Or don't, and I'll be forced to explain to Mr. Voss why I let one of Marino's dogs maul his property. Either way, this ends with you dead and me irritated." The man holding me hesitated, calculating odds. Marcus sighed and produced a gun with the same casual efficiency Adrian had shown, and that ended the calculation. My attacker released me and ran, crashing through underbrush in his desperation to get away. Marcus lowered his weapon and held out the umbrella. "You should come back to the house now, Miss Rossi." "I didn't take it." "He sent you to follow me." "He sent me to protect you from your own stubbornness." Marcus studied me with eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. "You could thank me. I did just save your life." "I could, but I'm guessing you didn't do it for my gratitude." He smiled then, sharp and approving. "You're smarter than you pretend to be." "That's good. He needs someone who can see the angles." The smile faded. "But running isn't one of them. Out here, you're a target. In there, you're a complication. Learn the difference." He walked me back in silence, the umbrella held carefully between us, a butler's courtesy wrapped around a bodyguard's purpose. At the side entrance, he paused. "He's in his study. Hasn't slept since you left. You should probably fix that." "I'm not responsible for his sleep schedule." "No. But you're the only one who can fix what keeping you safe is breaking inside him." Marcus handed me the umbrella like he was passing on a burden. "Everything in his world has a price, Miss Rossi. Even salvation. Maybe especially salvation." Then he was gone, leaving me dripping rainwater in the entrance hall, holding an umbrella I hadn't asked for, understanding far more than I wanted to. I found Adrian, exactly where Marcus said he'd be. His study door was open, light spilling into the dark hallway like an invitation or a warning. He sat at his desk surrounded by papers, still in his suit from however many hours ago, and the exhaustion etched into his face made him look mortal in ways I'd never seen. Human. Breakable. He looked up when I entered, and something complicated moved through his expression: relief, anger, resignation, all at once. "You came back." I didn't get far. I closed the door behind me, needing the privacy for whatever conversation this was about to become. "Your man stopped me. Saved me, actually, from someone who was waiting." "I know. Marcus radioed when he had you." Adrian leaned back, and the leather chair creaked with the sound of a long night. "I knew you'd try. The keycard wasn't a mistake, it was a test. I needed to know if you'd run, or if you'd trust me to know what I'm doing." The betrayal of it stole my breath. "You tested me? You let me walk into danger just to prove a point?" "I let you make a choice with safety nets in place. There's a difference." He stood, moving around the desk with predatory grace despite his obvious fatigue. "You want agency, Elena. I understand that. But your agency ends where your death begins, and I'm not willing to negotiate on that particular line. So what am I supposed to do? Just accept being locked up? Being owned? You're not owned, you're protected. And if you can't see the difference, you're not paying attention." He stopped close enough that I could smell rain on his cologne, see the storm in his eyes. Marina wants you dead or damaged to get to me. That makes you a liability I can't afford, except I'm not treating you like a liability. I'm treating you like someone worth burning my entire world down to keep safe. So yes, you're locked up. Yes, your choices are limited. But you're alive, and that's more than you'd be if I let you have all the freedom you think you deserve. The logic was airtight. The emotion underneath it was something else entirely. What do you want from me? I asked, and my voice came out smaller than I intended, tired and confused, and so far past my ability to pretend I understood this game. I want you to stop fighting me long enough to let me fix this. His hand came up, hovering near my cheek, not quite touching, asking permission for a contact that would cross every line we'd carefully maintained. I want you to trust that I know what I'm doing, even when it looks like control. And he stopped, some admission too dangerous to speak. What? His hand finally made contact, warm and gentle against my cold, rain-damp skin. I want you to still be here when this is over. I want to know that keeping you safe didn't just trap you in a different kind of hell. His thumb brushed my cheekbone, and his voice dropped to something raw. I want things I have no right to, with someone I have no business caring about. But here we are. The words hung between us, honest and terrible and impossible to take back. I should have pulled away. Should have reminded us both that this was employer and employee, captor and captive, criminal and collateral. But standing in his study at 3 a.m., both of us exhausted and soaked and running out of pretenses, it felt less like coercion and more like two people drowning who'd found each other in the dark. I don't know how to do this, I whispered. Neither do I. His forehead rested against mine, and his breath was warm against my lips. But I'm done pretending I'm not trying to. The kiss happened in the space between admissions, soft at first, testing, then deeper as weeks of tension found an outlet that wasn't violence or verbal sparring. He tasted like coffee and exhaustion and something darker I couldn't name, and when his arms came around me, it felt less like capture and more like the only safe place in a world that had proven itself vicious. We broke apart. Eventually, both breathing hard, both aware we'd just crossed a line that redrew every boundary we'd established. This doesn't change anything, I said, needing to say it even if neither of us believed it. It changes everything, he corrected, but his tone was gentle, understanding. But we can pretend it doesn't until you're ready to admit otherwise. He walked me back to my suite himself, hand at the small of my back like a promise and a warning. At my door, he paused. Don't run again, Elena. Not because I'll stop you, but because next time I might not be able to keep you safe from the consequences. Is that a threat? It's the truth. And we're past the point where I can afford pretty lies to make you feel better about what you're standing in the middle of. I nodded, too tired to argue, too confused to know what I even wanted to argue about. As I closed the door, I caught one last glimpse of him standing in the hallway, looking older than his years and lonelier than anyone who commanded so much power had any right to be. Sleep didn't come. Instead, I lay in expensive sheets in a beautiful cage and tried to understand when protection had started feeling like care and whether that made it better or infinitely worse. The next morning, everything changed again. Mrs. Kovac woke me early, her expression grimmer than usual. Get dressed, something formal. Mr. Voss needs you downstairs in an hour. What's happening? Damage control. And you're the centerpiece. She wouldn't explain further, just left me with a garment bag containing a dress I'd never seen, deep sapphire silk, elegant and expensive, the kind of thing women wore to events where appearances mattered more than truth. I dressed like I was preparing for battle, which, as it turned out, wasn't far off. Adrian waited in the entrance hall, surrounded by men in suits and one woman with a camera who looked bored and professional in equal measure. He'd transformed from the exhausted man in his study to the polished businessman I'd met in that cafe a lifetime ago. Perfect suit, perfect hair, perfect mask. When he saw me, something flickered in his eyes. You look beautiful. What's going on? Necessity. He offered his arm, formal and distant. Marino thinks you're a weakness. So we're going to show him you're something else entirely. He led me through the mansion to a ballroom I hadn't known existed, all crystal chandeliers and marble floors, and windows overlooking gardens where men, with earpieces, tried very hard to look like they belonged. There were people already gathering, society types, businessmen, the kind of carefully curated crowd that suggested this event had been planned with military precision. Adrian, I hissed, pulling him aside before we could be swallowed by the crowd. What is this? Our engagement party. He said it calmly, like he was announcing the weather. As of 10 minutes ago, you're my fiancé. Publicly, legally, protected by association in ways that even Marino can't easily touch. The floor dropped out from under me. You can't just "we're not, this isn't real." It's real enough. I've filed the paperwork, made the announcements, invited everyone who matters to witness it. His hand tightened on mine, the only sign of tension in an otherwise perfect performance. I know you're angry. I know this feels like another choice I'm making for you. But it's the only move that keeps you alive while I deal with Marino permanently. So, I'm just a pawn in whatever game you're playing? You're the queen, he corrected quietly. The piece I'm trying to protect, even if it costs me everything else. But yes, this is strategy. This is me using every tool I have to keep you breathing. Hate me for it if you want. But hate me alive. Before I could respond, someone called his name, and we were pulled into the crowd's center. Champagne appeared in my hand. Camera flashes blinded from every angle. Adrian's arm stayed around my waist, proprietary and protective, and I felt the weight of 100 assessing gazes measuring me, cataloging me, deciding what I was worth in the economy of power and influence. Then came the ring. Adrian produced it with the flourish of someone who'd done this before, which I supposed he had in his own cold way. Platinum band, diamond that caught light like frozen stars, and inside I saw it when he slipped it onto my finger, an engraving in Latin I couldn't read but felt like prophecy. What does it say? I whispered, too quiet for the cameras. In fide vincula. Bound by faith. His eyes met mine, and I saw apology there, and determination, and something that might have been hope if hope could wear a suit and carry a gun. Or bound by trust, depending on translation. I prefer the second. The crowd erupted in applause. Congratulations rained down from people I didn't know, would never know, who saw only the surface of this beautiful lie. And through it all, Adrian played the part of the devoted fiancé with such conviction that I almost believed him. Almost forgot this was theater designed to keep me alive rather than any real declaration of feeling. When he kissed me for the cameras, for the crowd, for whatever audience we were performing for, it felt nothing like our kiss in his study. This was public claiming, strategic positioning, a message sent to enemies about lines they couldn't cross. But underneath the performance, his hand trembled slightly against my back, and when he pulled away, his eyes held a question I couldn't answer. The rest of the party passed in a blur of faces and questions I deflected with lies that felt too smooth to be anything but practiced. Yes, we were very happy. Yes, it had been a whirlwind. Yes, love worked in mysterious ways, didn't it? By the time the last guest left, my face hurt from smiling and my heart hurt from something I refused to name. Adrian found me on the terrace afterward, still in my beautiful dress, staring at the ring that bound me to a man I couldn't decide if I trusted or feared. I'm sorry, he said simply, leaning against the railing beside me without touching. I'm sorry, this is what I have to offer. A public lie to cover a complicated truth. And what is the truth? I turned to face him, needing to see his eyes when he answered. He looked at me for a long moment, and something in his expression cracked open. The truth is, Marino won't stop. The truth is, making you mine legally is the only thing that gives me the authority to go to war over you without losing face with my own men. The truth is, he stopped, jaw working like words were fighting their way out against his better judgment. The truth is, somewhere in the middle of using you as strategy, I forgot to not care. And that makes you more dangerous to me than any enemy I've ever faced. The confession hung in the air between us, too honest to be taken back. I hate you, I whispered, but it came out broken, confused, nothing like hatred at all. Good. His hand found mine, thumb brushing over the ring he'd placed there. That means you still care. And as long as you care, even if it's dressed up as hate, I can live with being your villain if it keeps you alive long enough to maybe, someday, see me as something else. He left me there with the ocean crashing below and a ring on my finger that felt like both promise and prison. And as I watched him disappear into the mansion, I realized with sudden, terrible clarity that I'd stopped running not because I couldn't, but because some part of me had already decided that being trapped in Adrian Voss's world was less frightening than facing whatever existed outside it. That night, I wore the ring to bed and dreamed of cages made of silk and safety made of lies, and couldn't decide which one I wanted to escape. The days after the engagement blurred together in a haze of new routines and old fears. I was no longer confined to the interior suite, my public status as Adrian's fiancé apparently buying me freedom within the mansion's walls, if nowhere else. The staff treated me differently now, with a deference that felt performative and uncomfortable. Mrs. Kovac assigned me no more cleaning duties, which left me adrift in a house full of beautiful things I couldn't touch and conversations I wasn't part of. Adrian was gone more than he was present. Meetings, negotiations, the mysterious business of managing an empire under siege. When I did see him, it was in passing or at carefully staged dinners where we played our parts for whatever audience he deemed necessary. The man who'd kissed me in his study, who'd admitted to caring despite all strategy, had disappeared behind the mask of Adrian Voss, untouchable and calculating. I hated him for it. And I missed him, which was worse. Marcus became my unexpected companion in those strange days. He appeared at odd hours with coffee or books, settling into nearby chairs with the comfortable silence of someone who understood that sometimes company was better than conversation. "He's trying to keep you separate from what's coming," Marcus explained one afternoon when I asked why Adrian was avoiding me. "If things go badly, he wants you clean, uninvolved. Someone the authorities can't touch when they come asking questions." "What things? What's coming?" "War." Marcus said it simply, like discussing weather. Marino pushed too far, threatened what Adrian values. So now Adrian's going to show him why that was a mistake. He looked at me over his coffee, assessing. "You should know he's trading the docks, 3 of our subsidiaries, and enough leverage to cripple us financially. All to create a safe zone around you that even Marino can't breach without starting something that ends both operations." The scope of it stole my breath. He's dismantling his empire. For me. For the idea of you. For what you represent. Marcus's expression softened slightly. "I've known Adrian since we were boys running streets. We had no business surviving. I've never seen him put anything before the operation. Not family, not friends, not his own safety. But you." He shook his head, almost admiringly. "You terrify him more than Marino ever could. Because losing you would hurt in ways bullets can't reach. I don't want him to destroy himself for me." Too late. The paperwork's already filed. The deal's in motion. By the end of the week, you'll be legally protected in ways that cost him everything he built. Marcus stood, setting his empty cup aside. "So maybe figure out if that's a sacrifice you can live with, Miss Rossi. Because he's already made peace with it." The meeting happened 3 days later at the city docks, in the gray space between midnight and dawn when reasonable people were sleeping and unreasonable people were making deals that would ruin or save lives. I wasn't supposed to know about it. Wasn't supposed to be anywhere near it. But I'd learned the rhythms of the household, knew when security thinned because everyone who mattered was somewhere else, and I'd spent too long letting other people make decisions about my fate. So, I followed. The dock smelled like salt and diesel and old money exchanged in dark places. I stayed in shadows, watching from behind shipping containers as 2 groups of men faced each other across empty space. Adrian's men on one side, Marino's on the other, and in the middle, the 2 leaders negotiating the price of peace. "You're paying too much, Voss." Marino's voice carried across the water, gleeful with victory. "All this just to protect one girl. What happens when I find another pressure point? When I target someone else you're stupid enough to care about? You won't get the chance." Adrian stood perfectly still, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the coiled readiness for violence if negotiation failed. We do this deal. We're done. You stay out of my territory, I stay out of yours, and everyone goes home breathing. Unless I decide I'd rather just eliminate the problem. Marino gestured, and one of his men produced a phone, showing Adrian something on the screen that made his entire body go rigid. Got eyes on your pretty little fiancée right now. Funny thing is, she's not where you think she is. She's actually much closer to where we're standing. Would be a shame if he didn't get to finish. The gunshot cracked through the air, not from Adrian's men, not from Marino's, but from somewhere in the darkness behind me. I felt the bullet pass close enough to hear it whisper secrets, felt someone grab me and yank me down behind the container as chaos erupted across the docks. Adrian moved like violence incarnate, his weapon drawn and firing with the precision of someone who'd been waiting for this inevitability. His men flanked him, returning fire from Marino's crew, and the peaceful negotiation dissolved into the war both sides had been courting all along. I tried to run, to get out of the crossfire, but whoever had grabbed me held tight. Stay down, a voice hissed one of Adrian's men. I realized, someone assigned to follow me, just like Marcus had been that night I ran. Mr. Voss will handle this. But Adrian wasn't handling it. He was in the middle of it, exposed and vulnerable, trading fire with men who wanted him dead. I watched in horror as he took a hit, saw him stagger, saw the dark bloom of blood on his shirt even from this distance, and something in me broke open. I screamed his name without thinking, without caring that it gave away my position. And Adrian's head snapped toward my voice, his expression shifting from cold efficiency to raw terror in the span of a heartbeat. That moment of distraction cost him. Marino's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. Adrian's men surged forward, forming a protective barrier, returning fire with lethal intensity. Someone, Marcus, I realized, grabbed Adrian and started dragging him toward the vehicles as sirens wailed in the distance, as police descended on a war zone neither side had wanted, but both had made inevitable. The man holding me pulled me back, away from the violence, toward a car that materialized from shadow. We need to go, now. Not without him. He made me promise. If things went bad, I get you out first. That's the order. He was already pushing me into the vehicle, already signaling the driver. As we pulled away, I caught one last glimpse of Adrian, bloodied, held up by his men but alive. His eyes found mine across the distance, and I saw everything in them: relief, rage, love dressed up as violence, violence dressed up as protection. Then we turned a corner, and he was gone. The safe house was small, anonymous, the kind of place that existed in any city for people who needed to disappear temporarily. They left me there with guards at the door and no way to communicate with the outside world. No phone, no internet, just a television that showed news reports of a gang shooting at the docks, 2 dead, several wounded, an ongoing investigation into organized crime that threatened to expose empires built in shadow. I waited for hours that felt like years, turning Adrian's ring around and around on my finger, each rotation a prayer to gods I didn't believe in. Please let him live. Please let him be okay. Please let this not be my fault. He arrived just before dawn. The door opened, and there he was, pale, bloodied, bandaged around his shoulder and ribs, but alive. So, completely, impossibly alive. His men helped him inside, and he waved them away impatiently, focused only on me with an intensity that burned. You were supposed to stay at the mansion, he said, voice rough with pain and something rawer than anger. I couldn't. I needed to. I stopped because, what could I say? That I'd followed him into danger because the alternative was not knowing. That, somewhere in the middle of this mess, he'd become someone I couldn't imagine losing? He crossed the room in 3 unsteady steps and pulled me against him with his good arm, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe, could feel his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape. You could have died, he whispered into my hair. Marino had people in position. If you'd been hit, if they'd gotten to you. But they didn't, and you saved me. Again. I destroyed everything to save you. He pulled back enough to look at me, and his eyes were bright with emotion he no longer tried to hide. The deal's done. I traded the docks, the subsidiaries, enough assets to cripple what I built over 2 decades. And I'd do it again. I'd do it 1,000 times over because somewhere in the middle of trying to protect you, you became the only thing worth protecting. The confession hung between us, honest and terrifying. I reached up with shaking hands and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble, the warmth of skin that proved he was real and here and hadn't been taken from me by my own recklessness. I was supposed to be temporary, I whispered. Just a cleaner who sold her house. How did this happen? I don't know. His forehead rested against mine, and his breath was warm against my lips. But it did. And we're here. And I'm done pretending this is just strategy or protection or anything other than what it is. What is it? Love. Terrifying, inconvenient, completely illogical love. He said it like a confession, like an accusation, like someone admitting to a weakness that could get him killed. I love you, Elena Rossi. I love you enough to destroy myself saving you, and I need you to decide if that's something you can live with, because I'm done making choices for you. This one has to be yours. I looked at him, this man who'd bought my family's debt, who'd pulled me into his world, who'd fought and bled and sacrificed everything he'd built, just to keep me breathing, who was both my captor and my savior, my greatest threat and my only safety. The answer should have been complicated, but standing in a safe house at dawn with sirens still wailing in the distance, it was the simplest thing I'd ever known. I love you too, I said, and watched something in him break open. I hate that I love you. I hate that you made yourself necessary to me. But I do. I love you despite everything, maybe because of everything, and I choose, my voice caught, overwhelmed by the weight of it. I choose you, even knowing what it costs. He kissed me then, desperate and gentle and tasting like blood and salt, and the promise of something beyond survival. And for the first time since I'd received that eviction notice, I felt like I was home, not in a building or a place, but in the space between his heartbeat and mine, where safety and danger blurred into something I could finally name. We held each other as dawn broke over the city, two people who'd found each other in the darkness and decided that was reason enough to stay. The aftermath of the docks incident unfolded with the brutal efficiency of law finally catching up to legends. The police descended on both operations, armed with evidence they'd apparently been collecting for years, just waiting for the right moment to strike. Arrests were made. Empires fractured. The media talked about the fall of organized crime in the city as if it were a victory rather than just a reshuffling of power. Adrian turned himself in 3 days after the safe house, walking into the federal building with lawyers and the quiet dignity of someone who'd known this was coming. I wanted to go with him, but he refused. This part I face alone, he said, kissing my forehead like goodbye. But I'll see you again, I promise. The trial took months. I testified when called, answering questions about debt and protection and the complicated truth of loving someone who'd built his life on morally questionable foundations. The prosecution tried to paint me as a victim, the defense tried to paint me as complicit. But I was neither, or both, and the jury seemed to understand that some situations existed beyond clear categories of good and evil. In the end, Adrian was convicted of financial crimes but acquitted of the violence charges, not because he wasn't guilty, but because the evidence was too circumstantial, too compromised by the chaos of that night at the docks. He was sentenced to 5 years, with possibility of parole after 3. Light for what he'd done, heavy for what it took from us. When they led him away in handcuffs, he turned and found me in the gallery. Mouthed 3 words, "Wait for me." I did. I moved back into my parents' house, the house Adrian had bought, then secretly transferred back into my name, cleared of all debt and legally mine in ways it had never been before. The for sale sign came down. I hired contractors to fix the roof, repair the floors, restore the kitchen where my mother used to sing while cooking. Slowly, painfully, I rebuilt what had been falling apart. My sister visited often, still confused by everything that had happened, but trying to understand. Mrs. Kovac checked in monthly, bringing news of Adrian's case, his appeals, his behavior in prison. He reads constantly, she told me once. Books you recommended, Says he's becoming the man you deserve rather than just the one you're stuck with. The ring stayed on my finger. I wore it through lonely nights and difficult days. Through moments when I doubted everything and moments when I knew with perfect clarity that I'd made the right choice. It reminded me that binding could be both cage and covenant, depending on what you built within it. 3 years and 2 months after the trial, on a Tuesday morning that dawned gray and cool, Adrian Voss walked out of federal prison. I was waiting. He saw me standing by the car and stopped, just stopped, like he couldn't quite believe I was real. 3 years had changed him, softened some edges, sharpened others, added gray at his temples and lines around his eyes that suggested he'd spent too many nights thinking about what could have been. But when he smiled, it was the same smile I remembered from late-night conversations in his library, genuine and rare and worth waiting for. "You're here," he said unnecessarily. "Where else would I be?" He crossed the distance between us and pulled me into his arms, holding me like I was the only solid thing in a world that had shifted beneath him. "I wouldn't have blamed you for moving on. Building a life without." I stopped him with a kiss. 3 years of waiting poured into the contact. When we broke apart, I pressed something into his hand, the deed to the house, our house, with both our names listed as owners. "I rebuilt it," I told him quietly. "Fixed everything that was falling apart. It's home now. Real home. And it's ours if you want it." He looked at the document, then at me, and something in his expression broke open into wonder. "You waited. You actually waited. I chose you, remember? That meant all of it. The beautiful parts and the difficult ones. The past and the future and everything in between." I touched his face, feeling the familiar contours, mapping the changes. "So yes, I waited. And I'd wait again if I had to. But I'd really prefer if we could just move forward from here." He laughed then, real and full, the sound of someone remembering how. "Forward sounds good. Forward sounds perfect." We drove to the house together as the sun broke through clouds, turning the ocean from gray to silver to something that looked almost like hope. The repairs had transformed the place: fresh paint, solid floors, windows that didn't leak when it rained. But it still felt like ours, haunted by the right ghosts, built on a foundation of choices that had broken us both open and somehow made us whole. On the porch, the bird we'd saved, the one with a broken wing that had healed and flown away months ago, sat waiting. It looked at us with black eyes that held no judgment, just the patient wisdom of something that knew what it meant to be broken and choose to fly anyway. Adrian saw it and smiled. "I think that's a good sign. I think that's a promise," I corrected. "That broken things can heal. That cages can become homes. That love is worth the price we pay for it." He pulled me close, there on the porch of the house we'd both lost and found again, and kissed me with the gentle intensity of someone who'd learned that true possession wasn't about control but about choosing, every day, to stay. "Welcome home," I whispered against his lips. "Welcome home," he echoed. And as we stepped inside together, the ocean crashed against rocks behind us, patient and eternal, singing the same song it had sung for my parents, for me, for everyone who'd ever stood on that shore and decided that despite everything, hope was worth believing in. The door closed softly behind us. The bird took flight, healed and free, circling once before disappearing into the wide blue sky. And in the house by the sea, two people who'd found each other in darkness began building their light.